Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Simon Phipps joins me. We're going to be talking about a way to manage your team's PGP keys much easier. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Simon Phipps. Episode 523, recorded March 27th, 2019. Fluid Keys. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by DigitalOcean, the simplest cloud platform for developers and teams. Deploy, manage, and scale cloud applications faster and more efficiently with DigitalOcean. Sign up today and receive a free $100 credit at do.co/twit. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, little projects, projects you may be using every day and totally unaware of it, projects you might want to download right after this show is over and play with. Today is probably one of those. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Simon Phipps. Simon, welcome back to the show.
It's my great pleasure. And this week I'm actually at Twit Central here in the studios. And so you can see me in the Dr. Evil chair, sadly without a cat on my lap.
Missing a cat. And I am back home again and had a crisis this morning because the Wi-Fi wasn't working, but I got clever and figured out how to hack my network. So even though it's almost wasn't working, it was able to work. So we could actually do a show. So I'm very happy about that. We've got a we have two guests today. And scroll. Well, you know, I should learn to do that. Actually go to where the names are before I say we've got two great guests. Well, the project name is Fluid Keys, and we've got Paul Foxley and Ian Drysdale on. They're going to be coming on in a few minutes talking to us about what Fluid Keys is. And Fluid Keys advertises itself as, built on OpenPGP, and it makes it easy to implement great security across your organization. So let's back up a little bit. What's PGP? It's the original version of GPG, or was it the other way around?
Other way around. GPG is the free software equivalent of PGP.
Oh, okay. So PGP allows you to encrypt using public key encryption documents. But part of the thing that you have to worry about when you do that is you have to be able to give someone your public key and make it accessible somewhere so that they can encrypt it with your public key, and then you have the private key that allows you to decrypt it. And if you also want it authenticated, then there's a whole extra step in there. It's a two-step dance instead of just a single-step dance. But it's basically a way of having really, really high security. I've been told that it's actually government uncrackable, but who knows these days? There's so much stuff that's getting cracked, and who knows whether PGP has embedded codes in there that give backdoors to governments. I don't know. If you're really paranoid, none of this stuff works. But Simon, you have anything to add to that?
No, this is an interesting field because using PGP or GPG is insanely difficult for most ordinary mortals. And so anything that makes it easier to use it, easier to manage keys is a good thing. There's a few other projects that are trying to do that out in the marketplace at the moment. The best known free software one is a thing called Pretty Easy Privacy. And so I'll be interested to hear how they think their project compares with that and with some of the other things out there like Keybase.
Cool. And I remember back when I was first playing with PGP, PGP is Matt Zimmerman's thing, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and I met him once, and I got interested in playing with PGP. That the big problem was that there was this one, if I recall, this centralized public key store. I think it was MIT ran it.
Yeah, MIT's got one. The one that most people seem to use these days is the Ubuntu one, actually. But there are those central key stores. It looks like Fluid Keys is much more about sharing keys amongst a team so that people can use it within a distributed team rather than being a public key server. But we can clarify that with the guests.
I bet we can. I bet they know a lot more about this than we do at the moment. But by the end of the show, we'll all hopefully know enough to enjoy it and use it and want to download it right away. So, but before we get started, I do have a very important message because this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Easily run production applications with DigitalOcean, a scalable compute platform with add-on storage, security, and monitoring capabilities. Whether you're running one virtual machine or 10,000, DigitalOcean has you covered with the flexibility to customize standard or CPU-optimized droplets. Set up an SSD-based virtual machine in 55 seconds or less. Capture backups as snapshots. DigitalOcean is designed for developers. The easy-to-use control panel and API lets developers spend more time coding and less time managing their infrastructure. Use Kubernetes to improve availability, scalability, and resource efficiency of containerized apps. One-click apps. Skip the installation and configuration and deploy one of the pre-built images. Django, Docker, GitLab, LAMP, MySQL, Node.js, Ruby on Rails, and more. And DigitalOcean recently introduced managed databases for PostgreSQL, so you can launch your database with the push of a button while DigitalOcean handles the maintenance and updates. Free daily backups with point-in-time recovery, standby nodes with automated failover, end-to-end security. Over 2,000 open-source tutorials are available for beginners. Industry-leading price performance. Access the compute resources you need at the lowest rates, saving up to 55% compared to other cloud providers. Know what you'll pay monthly with a simple, flat pricing structure. Also included at no additional cost, 99.99% uptime SLA, cloud firewalls, full DNS management, 12 global data centers, and free round-the-clock tech support. Join over 150,000 businesses, including some of the world's fastest-growing startups and Stonehenge.com, who rely on DigitalOcean to remove infrastructure friction and deliver industry-leading price performance. Sign up today and receive a free $100 credit at do.co/twit. That's do.co/TWIT for a free $100 credit. DigitalOcean, trusted by businesses, loved by developers, and we appreciate their support of Floss Weekly. And now let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Paul Foxley. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in sunny Liverpool today in the northwest of England.
Oh, you could have almost driven down to Simon's house if he was there. Or actually,
it's only about a 6-hour drive.
Well, you could have driven over to Dan's place then. You know, if Dan was the co-host, that would have been fun. All right. And also, Ian Drysdale, welcome to the show.
Hi, Randall. It's a pleasure to be here.
Cool. And where are you speaking to us from?
I am the other side of the country from Paul. I'm over in Sheffield, so still in the north, but further east from Paul.
Okay. I only know where 3 or 4 cities are in all of England. The one that has Stonehenge in it, because I've been there. London, obviously, and all 3 of the ports for cruise ships. So all the major ports, anyway. So that's really all I know. So, Paul, let's start with you. Give us a 30,000-foot view. What are people reaching for when they have? What problem do people have when they're reaching for fluid keys?
Yeah, so the where fluid keys comes from, it's kind of come out of our concern that the world seems to be getting a bit more insecure. We're having a lot of security seems really bad at the moment. We're getting a lot of data breaches, and we've kind of had tools like you were talking about in the intro. We've had tools for decades that can really strengthen security, but we're not using them. So teams know that, and engineering teams know that they know the things they need to be doing. They know that we should be signing software and that we should be end-to-end encrypting data, but we're still not doing it. So Fluid Keys is addressing that. Fluid Keys is that's the problem we're trying to solve for teams that really know that they want to do a bit more and protect their customers' data and protect sensitive information. Fluid Keys is going to make that easy for them to do that.
And when you're saying teams, are you talking about just like a few people, or would this be good for, say, a 300-member organization?
We're talking about, I'd say, small to medium teams, so probably up to about 50, maybe 100. We're not really targeting enterprise, that sort of scale.
Okay, and so PGP, this isn't replacing PGP. We're still using PGP. This is just about the key management for it, right?
Right. So there's two elements to it. So well, there's three things it does. So and I'll talk about GPG. So and I know the history is a bit confused with the 3 names, because we've got the standard, which is OpenPGP, the original implementation PGP, and then we got GNU PG. So where we are is that the first thing that your Fluid Keys does is you can send secrets, so tokens, certificates, passwords from Fluid Keys to Fluid Keys. So that bit is kind of all within Fluid Keys, and that's end-to-end encrypted. and you can do that from the terminal. So that's a really convenient way for developers to send sensitive data between each other. The second thing is, this is where we start interacting more with GNU-PG, is that we automatically handle the awkward bit about making keys and exchanging them within a team. So you don't, as you described earlier, the problem is you have to get your key to people and sign it and all that stuff. And within a team context, FluidKeys does that for you. So it handles the creation and the exchange within like a trusted team. And that's the bit where we start interacting with GNU-PG, because we push keys into GNU-PG so it works there as well. And that leads on to the third thing, which is that it kind of makes other tools better. So if you're using Git, say, for signing commits, or you're using the open source password manager Pass, all of those things which use GNU-PG suddenly work better because you've got all your team's keys, and FluidKeys can start to configure those for you so they work better for your team.
Cool. And how did this get started?
Well, it came about from I've been a kind of slightly exasperated encryption user for a long time, and a couple of years ago, I was thinking about, well, what are the practical things I could do to make GNU-PG easier to use? And I looked at a load of problems, and one of the problems is that this will be familiar to anyone that uses it frequently, is that keys expire after a certain time, and that's good practice. To not have keys with like infinite length. But what happens is people don't realize they're going to expire, much like certificates, although that's largely sort of solved now, SSL certificates. And so what happens then is you get cryptic errors because your contacts can't email you anymore, and something goes wrong and you don't know what's happened. And I remember that well. So I tried out, I thought, what would happen if I did something a bit cheeky? I was running the part of the public key server network that you talked about earlier, which is a distributed network. And I thought, what would happen if I actually looked at which keys are expiring 3 days from now and sent some emails to them to remind them and say, look, your key's expiring. And I was kind of worried, what would people make of it? And I just did 100 emails, and I did them manually, and I got some really great responses. And so that led me to make a thing called ExpiryBot. And it's just a little automated service which does that even today. And it sends a couple of 100 emails a day. And I get many, we get loads of replies that say this was helpful. So it's obviously solving a problem. And we thought, Ian and I were working together. We were working together at the Co-op and working on various new business ideas. But there was always this niggle that what if we applied, really good usability to open source tools like GPG or, GNU-PG. And that's kind of where it all came from.
Mm-hmm. Let's give Ian a chance to talk here. So what... How does this? What's the current status of the project? Is this usable today?
Yeah, well, it's an exciting time to be speaking to you. We released first version yesterday, so it's available to download. Prior to that, I think it's been about 6 months where we've been actively developing it. And we've had other teams using it along the way, and we've been conducting user research as we go. So we've had a few releases up to now. But yeah, this is the first version's out there, and we're keen for people to download it, test it out, and give us their feedback.
And so obviously I'm wondering, I'm sure there's a central repository then of all the public keys. But where are the private keys stored? Is that still stored only on my equipment?
Yeah, technically that's exactly it. We're, as Paul said, we're building on GNU-PG. We're using that as the local key store at the moment, so that's right. We're effectively creating a team server where all of the public keys are there, but all of the your private keys remain on that device. That's the design.
Now, obviously, the keys need to get updated. Do I authenticate that I'm still the same owner with this new public key to replace the previous one? How? Do I have to sign something to do that?
So this is it. I think this is where we, these sorts of questions start to highlight the complexity that's sort of baked into the spec within PGP. And then I think what you start to see is like GNU-PG, the command line interface sort of represents all of that, right, back to the user. And so often I think Simon said at the start, like for mere mortals, it's a completely bamboozling experience. So you're sort of asked like, okay, provide a strong password, or if you get a key off someone and you've not perhaps signed it, it's like, you shouldn't trust this key. You know, there's often like conflicting information about this. And so what we're trying to do now with Fluid Keys is make like sensible recommendations. So we, for example, we provide a strong password. We use the Diceware list to create 6 memorable words that we then give the user and say, okay, this is going to be your keys password, store it somewhere safe. But we also then prompt to store it in the system keychain or keyring. And I think like at each step, it's just trying to make sure that then means that we can be running a process in the background that basically takes care of all of the synchronization, all of the exchange. But it's there if you need to go and tinker with it. So I think what we've tried to do is really approach it from that like user-centered design, rather than thinking, okay, all of this stuff should be configurable from the off, and we should ask the user about every sort of permutation of it. We're trying to take some sensible approaches that quickly get you and your team using strong encryption. And it's there if you want to start to sort of edit that and change that. But our primary driver here is to remove those sort of questions about usability.
Can you have the equivalent of a key signing party where I can authenticate that this other public key in this repository is who they say they are?
Right. So what we're getting into now is talking about like the way we trust, isn't it? That the keys are who we say, who the key belongs to the person that is giving it us. We've decided so key signing parties, we've heard about this, and I think theoretically, they sound good. The reality is, I think these things simply aren't scaling. We hear about organizations now where, any more than 10 people, and suddenly you're starting to have to get each person to sign, another 11 keys, and you're sort of, it's a factorial problem. And so what we're starting to do is rather take a trusted admin approach. And what it is that there's a central admin who has a team roster. So just a list, a TOML file of all of those keys and fingerprints, and they then cryptographically sign that is the team. So it's important that administrator and then the user joining the team verify one another's key, make sure that the fingerprint's right. And we're introducing the idea of you might not want to communicate this across email. You might try and find an alternate channel. But once that's been decided, once we think that the admin trusts them, then we're happy for the rest of the team to believe that. Because I think, and in fact, what we do under the hood is then sign all of those keys, but keep all those signatures locally. So I think we're trying to use this model of trust. But Paul and I just last week, Paul's much more au fait with the sort of history of trust in this model and might want to come in on it. But I think what we've seen is, in theory, these things are good, and but in practice, they're incredibly difficult to implement, especially at scale.
Yeah. So are you picking up implied trust from places like Keybase? Because, Keybase has done a lot of work to make sure that people can authenticate that their identity is linked across multiple services. That seems a really good approach for at least checking the key belongs to the person that says owns it. Are you picking up trust from there as well?
At this stage, we're not. I should say it's early days, and we're not. We're open to ideas. And I think what Keybase is doing is brilliant. I think the way they tied in this idea of social proof. If you can prove you can post a gist, or you prove you can send a tweet, then you can start to corroborate that to believe that then that's the key. To stress, I suppose, we're not trying to sort of create a global network here. We're trying to help small distributed development teams securely use encryption superpowers amongst themselves. So I think in some ways that question of discovery, I think Keybase are really tackling well, and I believe that sort of solves that problem in some ways. There's no reason why in the future, though, we couldn't start to implement with that.
Right. And looking at the capabilities you've got here made me think of PEP, a pretty easy privacy. Would you compare what you're doing as being a kind of a team-based equivalent of what P equals P are trying to do across the network?
I guess in some ways, we're not trying to define a new approach to it. We're trying to build on PGP itself. I mean, Paul, you've looked a bit more into PEP. What's your take on it?
I think the main we've met the PEP guys and the people that are working on the Sequoia Rust implementation, and hats off that there's other people working on this. I'm really pleased about that. The main thing is that we're at this stage, particularly, we're really focusing on engineering teams. So the tools and the workflows that we're helping with are for developers. So like storing, sending passwords and credentials, having shared repository, secure repositories. So we're being quite focused about who it's for, and that's the biggest difference. That's what at this point we're aiming squarely on, like small to medium size engineering teams. It's a command line app. It's not trying to be a desktop app, and it knows who it's for. So that's the main thing.
So how does this work as a piece of software? So I have a client that I install on my my development machine, and then there is a server component as well. How does it all work out?
Exactly that, yeah. So there's both are written in Go. So there's a binary. You can install from source, but there's a Go binary which uses the Golang OpenPGP library inside, and then there's a server. The Go binary provides a command line application, and all the commands you can do. Some of them interact with the API with the server, and then the server we're running as well. And that has quite a bit of shared code base. So that implements a lot of the stuff we talked about with the team roster. That's the architecture of it. Pretty simple. One client, one server.
Right. And is that server managed using the client, or do I have to go to the server and manage it separately to load and remove keys and so on?
It's entirely inside the command line. So the server doesn't have like a web interface. It's apart from the bit where you can verify an email address, there's nothing in a browser. So when you manage your team, it's done via the FluidKeys command line, which changes a config file, signs it, and then uploads the new one.
Right. So looking at the capabilities here, you've got 3 capabilities on your web page: sending secrets to other team members. So I just do that with a command line. Type in plain text the secret that I want to send, and the utility works out how to encrypt it across the wire. Is that right?
Exactly. So it fetches the verified public key and encrypts it locally, uploads the encrypted secret to our server, and then the receiving side receives it and decrypts it. That's exactly right.
And the receiver needs to go on their command line, type a command, and receive the secret that's waiting for them on the server.
They do at the moment, yeah. There's nothing more kind of whizzy than that at the moment. That's very popular feedback.
Yeah, it doesn't magically appear on the clipboard or anything. We worked on that at IBM in the 1990s, just in case. And then you can also, it's also integrated with email by the looks of things. And now that's a horrendously complicated area. What are you doing there?
Yeah, so where we are right now is that so as of version 1, is that we're sorting out the trust bit. So that you'll always have your team's keys, they'll be trusted correctly. So that if you go and install Thunderbird and Enigmail, then or indeed GPG Mail with the Mac mail client, then they'll somewhat work out the box. They'll work out the box a bit more than they would have done, but there is some configuration to do, and that's today. So, but what we're aiming at is to be able to configure some of those things for you. So. To be able to get into Thunderbird and actually configure Enigmail settings so it works a bit better, like turn on the checkboxes that you always have to turn on when you install Enigmail. And we're planning those kind of integrations is the plan for the next couple of versions of FluidKeys, that we can make other open source tools. We can configure them for you as well as configuring GNU-PG underneath. Right.
And so there's a lot of enterprises are using a branded Gmail as well for their email client, much to some developers' chagrin. There's a thing called Mailvelope. Are you integrating with Mailvelope at all so that it's also able to do email?
So so the BSI, the German Information Security Department, they funded a project earlier in the year, at the end of last year, to make Mailvelope work with GNU-PG rather than only being able to work in browser. So it used to use only OpenPGP.js, and now it can talk through native messaging to GNU-PG, and that. I've got a spike, like I've got a whip branch on FluidKeys where I've made that work for me with Gmail, with Mailvelope. So that, yes, that's in the future.
Excellent. So I find myself using Mailvelope quite often, and I'll be very pleased to have a tool that works with that. And then you also appear to have a password manager in there. So I appear to be able to go retrieve team passwords from a password manager.
Ian, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah,
I keep hogging the air.
No problem. Yeah, so Pass builds itself as the sort of standard Unix password management tool. So an alternative to something like 1Password or LastPass. And again, I think with this tool in particular, it was probably more conceived for an individual, to be using to store passwords. There's multiple plugins into browser or scripts and things, but it's also possible to configure that to then share passwords across the team. So again, as Paul says, I think we see it as an opportunity to effectively use FluidKeys to be able to like puppet that and make that seamless as well. So you end up with effectively a subdirectory that is kept in sync, and that it's encrypted using PGP across your team, and you've got logins to DigitalOcean and or your other services that you're using. Yep.
So it looks from GitHub as if you're the only two people with commit rights on the project. How big is the team on this?
Yeah, I'm afraid, you're looking at it. We both quit our day jobs about 7 months and counting, and are going out seeing if we can make a sort of honest business built out of developing this open source tool. We've had a lot of support along the way, though. I talked earlier, we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't been able to have all the kind of user research interviews. People have been really receptive to the idea. I think people really identify with the pains we've talked about, right? And they sort of know that these are tools that they should be using, but they're just so difficult. So those people have been really generous in coming forward to show us around their configs, talk about their workflows, and we've been listening with them. And then there are other open source communities out there that are sort of thinking, well, might we start to use this for doing code signing and verification? Make sure that the contributions to our code is only coming from signed contributors. So that's kind of interesting to hear. But in terms of the day-to-day work, it's Paul and I at this stage, which is really why we're trying to keep it super focused on this niche. We're not trying to build a new standard. We're just trying to solve what we think is an important small problem. Like, it was born out of a frustration we felt, right? When you go to start a new product or a new service and your options are like Google for email, MailChimp for like mailing list and things like this, and all of these things feel slightly I don't know, there's something slightly unsatisfying when you're looking at them from a security perspective, in my opinion. And so how can we help small development teams that are getting started in that way start to make great security choices from the get-go? That's the aim.
Right. So I'm interested that you're starting a business. More power to you, starting a business around an open source project of your own. How on earth are you going to make money with this?
It's a good question. So the plan is that you can use it for free as an individual. So you're going to get all of the things we talked about, the sort of stronger keys, easy configuration. But then if you want to get the real value out of it, it's going to come from using it within your team. We're going to keep it free for pairs. And then we're going to look at a subscription model beyond that for larger teams. But we also intend to provide discounts for teams that are going to align with this social mission. And obviously, like open source software is something that fits within that.
So how are you going to enforce that? I mean, I see it's under AGPL, which is always the indication of people who've been speaking with a source of funding. But how are you going to do that with open source software? Surely I can just download it and install it on any system I want to.
Yeah. So it's a good question, right? I think you start to get into the, what is it, the value then that we're going to start providing within this space. And in truth, there's going to be questions about would a team prefer to sort of spin up their own version or their own server within this? At the moment, to be totally transparent, the client today is licensed as AGPL. We intend to also license the server, but it isn't at the moment.
Aha.
So we're still trying to work through this. Our intention is, though, because I think ultimately you see other services out there that have, sort of trade on their reputation or the sort of brand that they're creating around this. So I don't know. I think our biggest risk right now, if I'm brutally honest, is probably one of irrelevance rather than someone spinning up a competition at this stage. So at this stage, I think philosophically, I believe that the world is better when it's open. So I want to try and sort of do that, but believe that we can charge subscription models just to take the pain away for small development teams to quickly get up and running with that secure software. I could be proven wrong.
I suppose we're making a bit of a bet that actually it's a bit awkward to run the server. And teams can do it, but they're not going to have all the benefit of some of the network effects that we're planning to get, because there is a bit of a global aspect to it. And also, our ambitions aren't that huge. The subscription's not very much. So there's a point at which we're not trying to charge thousands of dollars to teams. So whether it's worth people running their own, I don't know. Particularly if they don't have the comfort that the official version, I guess, will have the incident security updates and it'll have us, reviewing it. I suppose we're making a bit of a bet that teams won't want to run it, but we are prepared to be proven wrong, I suppose.
So we have a question from the chat room. Olaf asks, any chance of support for iOS?
So iOS is, I would say, in the near future, no, but what we may be able to do, and I was speaking to one team who has sort of done this. They've implemented this themselves. They use IPGmail, I think that's the right name for it, which is an iOS client, and they've automated putting their own keys into it, so that they can. I think he was saying he plugs a cable in and then has a UDEV rule or something, which immediately syncs that, something like that. So it puts his private key onto the device. So we would be more likely to take that approach than to, I think, at this stage, than to make a native client ourselves.
Okay,
but that's not forever.
Okay, so it's Go. So does it run everywhere Go does?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So I could run a Mac OS client and work with your server on a Linux box. Yep,
and that's what Ian does at the moment.
Yeah. We're actively supporting Mac OS, and Paul's got an Ubuntu install that end.
Does Go run on Windows?
Do you know what? We've not even talked about it. It's so far down. It's so far out of my experience.
Do people still use Windows, Randall?
Yes.
Okay.
I know they do. They do.
Yeah. So because obviously, if you're talking about teams, small enterprise teams, somebody's going to be running Windows in that group. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they are.
Well, once we've exhausted all the ones that we can reach that are using Mac and Linux, then we'll worry about Windows.
I think it's really worth stressing our ambition on this stuff. Paul and I talk about trying to build something that 1,000 people love. We're really going for a small niche here. It's exciting to have a chance to speak with you, because I think I'm hoping that some of the people out there listening to this will sort of it'll resonate with them. But it's such a sort of we have this sort of real focus on those small startup teams.
So I'm hopelessly naive about this. So forgive me if it sounds like a stupid question, but I use Mail.app on my Mac. Will this integrate with that somehow? Can it provide the keys for me sending and receiving encrypted email with Mail.app, or do I need another app?
Yeah, you can use GPG. The GNU PG tools have an add-on for Mail, so then it'll just work. Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right. And I remember many years ago when I was first playing with GPG, I somehow managed to configure my Emacs so it all had like automatic signing and things like that. And then I let my certificates expire, and I just said, screw it. I'm done with that. I'm done with that.
Yeah, we all set these things up in a flurry of like, it's sort of around the time that we start to do a bit of spring cleaning, isn't it? Or like getting the paperwork in order. It's
right.
Good intention.
Yeah, it's crazy like that. So how does it, what kind of testing are you able to do with this thing? And are you?
So we've, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We took quite a strict approach from the beginning. So we've built the whole thing in a test-driven way. So, and it's been quite good to see, like, Ian's really held me to, in the end, it turned out Ian's like the one that's really strict about this now, because it wasn't like that at the beginning. And we've ended up being quite strict that it probably takes significantly more time, the development that we've been doing, because of the testing, but we have so much more confidence. We've caught so many interesting problems and edge cases through testing. So we're testing at that level. We've got some integration testing with GNU PG as well. And yeah, I think that's probably what there is to say about that.
And how does this integrate with Git? Is it like the Git sign the commit command is using underlying GPG or something?
That's right. So exactly. So with Git, it's very convenient that there's a couple of after doing a couple of commands, Git will be able to just use the key that FluidKeys made. So FluidKeys makes the key, pushes it into GPG, and then Git can just use it once it's had a little bit of configuration. But on the verifying side as well, so that's for signing commits. So if you want to sign commits, you can do that. But if you also want to see that commits in your Git log come from your team, then that's where FluidKeys really comes into its own, because you start to see all those signatures validate correctly in your Git log. So a lot of times, if you just set up Git signing on your own, but your team aren't doing it, or they've maybe forgotten to like refresh their key or something, and you do Git log, you just see all these bad signatures. So it doesn't really gain you anything. You're looking at the code base, and you don't really know if any of it's signed properly. So that's another thing where, by making sure that GNU PG has always got the right up-to-date keys, Git works better. And a future version will just kind of auto-magically configure Git for you as well. And we've got plans for a GitHub integration too, where we can do pull request testing to check that a pull request has come from has a signature that's valid for someone in the team. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. That's not where we are today.
And obviously, you're a distributed engineering team. So, what methods do you find best for managing that?
Oh, Ian, you should talk about this. This is your thing, isn't
it? So, no, it's good. So we're frequently pairing. I think similarly to what Paul described with the testing, like it might be slowing us down in some respects, but the knowledge that we're both gaining of all parts of the way that the app's working is really helpful. Plus, as a distributed team, it's a bit more social, to have a little bit of time with someone on the microphone and sharing sort of problems and thinking. And then we're following most sort of like, to some extent, like an agile approach. We've got a board of tickets. In fact, we've made all of this transparent. So on the website, there's a roadmap, but you can click through where we've got a public Trello board of all the tickets that we're working through. So we try and kind of set ourselves a weekly goal. we have got a sort of, we've set ourselves a target to give ourselves a year to see where we can get to with this. So to keep focused each week, we're trying to get a chunk of work done, and we kind of judge then which are the highest priority things that we need to do to get there. And then we do have the convenience of being in the same time zone and not too far away, because we've worked together in person. I think we've had a good amount of time to like form as a team. And because I think otherwise, like this sort of remote work, I'm not sure, I think it would take real effort, in that time where you're trying to build like trust and learn each other's quirks and things and working patterns. And, how do you read if someone's feeling a bit grumpy that day with some of these tools? But to be honest, no, we're finding it really productive. Yeah, it's good.
How do you do distributed pairing? What technology are you using?
We're using Zoom. So, just connecting, sharing screens, and then, it's similar setup to what I'm talking to you here. We've got headsets, so the sound's really clear. To be honest, like you say, making sure the Wi-Fi is working. And the other thing is like, for 40 minutes, every 40 minutes we take a break, get a cup of tea or something, because I think like it can be quite exhausting, that feeling of like constantly being next to someone or in someone's, like you're not quite like sat next to them, when you're using this sort of technology. They're like somewhere between like the screen and you. And it can be it gets quite intense after a while. So I think like just factoring in, we set up Slack to remind us every 40 minutes, like take a break.
Cool.
We did a lot of experimenting as well. Sorry.
Yeah.
I interrupted. Sorry. I'm asking this because I found out earlier this week that ZipRecruiter now has more employees as remotes than they have at their headquarters. So it's a really interesting setup, and we're using Slack to do the communications. We don't do much pairing except in person, so that's why I'm kind of looking at the tools. Have you looked into using VS Code's share screen stuff?
We've not at this stage, but that's just because
you have to get me off Vim, which isn't going to happen.
Advocate. So I'm happily bashing away with VS Code. But to be honest, we're not while the other person's driving, the sort of navigator's suggesting or like describing or asking them questions really. So we're not getting into too much where we have to jump into each other's terminal,
Okay.
But it sounds great. It sounds great, definitely. And as Paul says, I think like every team will find their own rhythm with this stuff. So having a few of these tools to like experiment with, I think the biggest thing actually is that every fortnight we retro, and that's a chance where we basically we're not talking about code or anything like that. We're just talking about like the good things that are on our mind, the meh things, the things maybe we've got questions about, or the like frustrations and the things that are angering us. And like it gives you a chance in that setting. Like sometimes it's only 15 minutes long, but by knowing you've got a space where you can be like, that thing where you always do that thing. You can kind of say it quite safely, and then you can like try and identify some actions that are going to improve that next time. So I think like carving out space to actively like reflect on your practice is probably one of the most important things, not just thinking like, this tool's going to solve it in that way.
I should say as well, we've been doing it a while now and we love it. Like it's really nice. We've got a really nice thing going. So it's like we've had time to get really fed up of working from home and from shared offices, but we haven't. So it's working really well.
Nice. And you both quit your jobs, 9 months ago, something like that. Were you working together in the same company?
Yeah, there was a spell just before that we were. Yeah, exactly. So that was where we were in a sort of like an R&D team there. And as I say, that maybe that gives you a space to like practice some of this stuff, and then find that you can take the lessons you've learned and the sort of behaviors you've learned offline. I'd be interested I've read I'm always interested in I think it's 37 Signals who talk a lot about the sort of virtues of remote working and the flexibilities it offers and things. So I'm kind of interested in how it applies as teams grow and things. It's interesting, with just 2 as well. I'm sure it'll be different to something like 10 or 30 or 100.
Emily Lestrange, a frequent person in our chat room, actually wonders what your view is on the biggest hurdle to PGP adoption overall.
Yeah, so I think maybe I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I think it has to be just usability. I think, PGP itself has been around since the early 90s and it's battle proven. Technically, I think it's a strong solution. But from a usability perspective, it's just a total nightmare. The horror stories you hear of when people have to send something encrypted and accidentally send a private key, or it's just so easy to mess things up. So I think the biggest barrier is that is a question of usability. And so that's what we're trying to do. Just make it simple to start using that. Because as a standard, it's brilliant and it's got a lot of tools have built on the assumption that you're good at using keys and you've got keys that amongst your teams like Git or these pass and things like that. The reality is that's really hard. Just getting the key, remembering where it was, realizing you've forgotten the passphrase, or that you suddenly you've pushed it to a server and you don't have a revocation certificate. It's all just a confusing mess. So I think if we can improve the usability, then we'll improve people's uptake of PGP.
We broke it down a bit further as well when we were looking at it. So from listening we've talked to a lot of teams, and there's sort of 3, more specifically, there's 3 things. The first is that they're the tools that exist at the moment are quite individualistic. They're made for individuals. They're not made for. They don't prescribe workflows for teams. So they'll leave you at the point where you've made a key, and then they say, okay, well now you've got to go and find other people's keys. But actually, that's the important bit. So that's one thing, the individualism. Another barrier is the level of education that you're expected to have, which isn't reasonable. I think there's this belief that it'll all be fine if you educate your users, and I just think that's proven to be untrue. You look at the way that Signal is taking off, or even you look at WhatsApp with their end-to-end encryption just built in, and 2 billion people now using end-to-end encryption that don't know about encryption. I think that's probably proven that theory wrong. And then the other thing, I can't remember what the third one was, but there was a third one that more specifically,
Well, we're almost out of time. I got a couple final questions for you. Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before I have to let you go? Either one.
No, I don't think so. I think it'd be really interesting to hear, if people are up for trying it out, or if they have workflows that are built around PGP that they think others might benefit from. In some ways, I think what Paul was saying, have you folk come across Git flow as a sort of, it's an idea of how you use Git, and it sort of suggests you check out a feature branch and then you merge it, then you merge it back into master, because Git itself doesn't have opinions on how it's used, right? And as a result, loads of people might use it in different ways. And then Gitflow came along, and the development community had a sort of way of using Git that suddenly I think exploded in productivity. So I think we're trying to also look for that, what are the patterns and what are the tools that we should be promoting. So yeah, if there's people out there that are using PGP in interesting ways, get in touch with us. We'd love to speak to you. And equally, if you're not, but you think some of the stuff we've talked about would be valuable, encrypting secrets, encrypting backups and things like that, we'd love to hear how you get on trying Fluid Keys. As I say, we released the first version yesterday. It'll be exciting.
Given that that's the case, how did you get beta testers?
So we've had a few pre-releases. Sorry,
No, go for it.
We've had We had a couple. Yesterday was our 1.0, but we've had a few releases out. So we've been releasing constantly. Actually, from the very first release, all it did was made a key, and it gave you a password, and it made you a backup. Like, it was really simple, and we put it out there. A lot of the beta testers we've got and the community really that are kind of cheering us a bit have come from the Expiry bot ultimately. So that community that got that email maybe like 2 years ago, some of those people have kept in touch and they've been interested in what we're doing, so we've been constantly asking for feedback through a little mailing list we've got that people opt into, and people have been great on that, and that's really steered us actually. And we do a lot of phone calls with people, so we get on the phone as many times as we can a week as we can to listen to teams and get them to try stuff out. And that's been kind of cool. But yeah, we've had a few releases.
Nice. And I normally ask 2 more questions of both of you, but I think I know the answer for both of you. So it's your favorite text editor is Vim, and your favorite language is Go, right?
Yeah,
yes,
Go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I already picked that up from earlier in the show, so that works out well. So, guys, thanks for coming on the show and talking about your project. I think this will be exposing you to a much larger audience, and I wish you success, and especially in figuring out a business model that actually works.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been great speaking to you, Randall, and thanks, Simon. I really appreciate it.
Very, very good. That was Paul Foxley and Ian Drysdale talking to us about Fluid Keys. What do you think there, Simon?
I think it's a great approach. When you look at PGP or GPG, the big challenge is that it's been this bucket that features have been thrown in over the last 20 years, and it's got command line interfaces for absolutely everything, and every task you need to do uses a different combination of them. And for the longest time, it has needed subsetting so that there are 1 or 2 workflows separated out. And the idea of building another tool that sits over the top and subsets seems to be exactly the right way to make GPG much more usable by developer teams. So I think this is a great approach that they're taking. I'm a little suspicious of the open core model of using a proprietary server with open source client, and I'm hoping they find a way of doing business that means they don't do that. But overall, I think the approach is a good one, and that the need that they're meeting is a need that is real inside development teams.
Yeah, I got yelled at for doing the show 3 or 4 weeks ago where that was the case as well, where the server was locked up and the client was open source. I hear you have some guests with you in the studio. Yes,
so I've been. I'm showing another group around Silicon Valley this week, which is why I'm here in gorgeous downtown Petaluma. And so over there in the studio, we have a team from. They're all colleagues who work together at Bosch, in actual fact, and they won a hackathon in Bolzano, and Peter in the middle there is the rep from Bolzano. They're unusual for the study tours. Usually it's a group of students that win these hackathons. They were one of the exhibitors at the hackathon and decided they would enter for a laugh, and then discovered that they won it. So Olaf here in the front, gives a wave. Olaf is the guy who ported Perl over to what eventually became Symbian. It was the Epoch when he ported it, and he ported Python as well. And the rest of the team are very experienced developers who work all on e-bike software and systems, I believe.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Petaluma, guys. Well, I'm not there, but I have been there. It's been like 4 years since I've been there.
It's about time you came back up here. We ought to do a 2-handed show here sometime. Look, I'm here in the last week in April. Why don't you come as well?
Because last week in April I'll be somewhere else. That's too close in. I have to plan this stuff about 3 months out, or else I never get anywhere. Anyway, so interesting show. Again, I wish them all the luck. Anything to kind of reduce the barrier to making sure that your email, at least within your team, is encrypted is a good thing. So I wish them all luck on that one. So coming up soon, we have EdiSync. That's actually next week. It's secure, end-to-end, encrypted, and privacy-respecting sync for your contacts, calendars, and tasks. Mycroft is the world's first open source assistant. You think Siri, Google Assistant, things like that, or Alexa. Mycroft runs anywhere on a desktop computer, inside an automobile, or on a Raspberry Pi. And it's not true that it runs anywhere. It doesn't run on Mac OS yet. So that was kind of annoying. I wanted to play with it. Ionic is coming up. That's the framework for free open source mobile UI. Toolkit for developing high-quality cross-platform apps for native iOS, Android, and the web, all from a single code base. That is extremely familiar, given that I'm a Flutter developer, which promises roughly the same things. I think Ionic uses a more familiar TypeScript or JavaScript, though, and Flutter uses Dart, so it's a whole different language to learn. Dart's not hard to learn. Also on the schedule, Redis is going to come back. They have done a lot of new things, apparently. They said they wanted to promote them. They were on the show a couple years ago. It's an in-memory data structure store used as a database, cache, and message broker. So think like a, what do they call these, NoSQL database sort of thing.
Yeah,
so,
and notoriously controversial at the moment because they've just been changing their license to a proprietary license on the little bit of open core code that links them into the enterprise. So they ought to get some tough questions when they're here.
Oh, Simon, I hope you can be back. Otherwise, I have to channel you. That's all I can ever do. So we call it in the chat room channeling Simon right now. So it's kind of cool. That's all I have on the schedule right now. I've got mail coming in that I haven't had a chance to respond to yet that says, can we be on your show and like that. So that's coming in rapidly. Many of these are people I met at Scale, and where else was I at a recent conference? It was just Scale. A couple of them are from the KubeCon that I went to back in December. So we got people coming in. I am going to be at the open source the Cloud Factory Summit next week. And the point of that is that I'm going to be walking around the exhibit halls looking for things that are all things Kubernetes related and cloud related, and try to get some more people on the show that are cloudy and Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is a magic word these days. So that'll be fun. The big homepage for this show is at twit.tv/floss. Linked from there is the upcoming guest spreadsheet. You can see who I'm working on. If you have a project that's not on that list, have them email me, merlin@stonehenge.com, and I will get them on the show as quick as possible. We've actually got slots open about 5 weeks out, so I got to start hustling again. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv, which we took a couple of questions from today. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin on Twitter. I can no longer talk about the Google Plus stuff because that all went away. So bye-bye Google Plus. I'll also be at the Perl Conference, a.k.a. YAPSI, in mid-June. I believe that's something that starts with a P, Pittsburgh, maybe. Anything you want to plug, Simon?
I'm wandering around the world to select world tour locations. I'll be in Florida next week. I'll be in Barcelona in 2 weeks' time. I'm back here in the Bay Area at the end of April. I'll be in the New York area for the new OSI board meeting. OSI's board now has a majority of female directors, and we'll be having the first board meeting in that context at the beginning of May. I am also now backed by a bunch of lovely people on Patreon who follow me at patreon.com/webmink. And if there are any viewers or listeners who would like to support me that way, I would be very happy indeed. If you want to meet me, do let me know, and I will try and arrange to meet you for coffee or for maybe even food in a location of your choice on the world tour. I may even make it to OSCON. Who knows? Are you going to OSCON this year, Randall?
I'm pretty sure I am. I need to first I didn't submit a call for in the CFP, so I'm not going to be speaking. But they generally give me a press pass, so I'll be there. And it's actually in my hometown. So if I don't go this year, I'll really be missing out. So that's always fun when I can just hop on the Max and go downtown and enjoy the show. So
yeah, it's much harder for me. I've got to actually fly over to the west coast of the US and find somebody who wants to pay for me to fly. So that's it's always a much harder visit.
Yes, indeed. Max tickets are pretty cheap, so I can get downtown pretty easily. So anyway, Simon, it was great having you back, and you asked some useful insight questions as you always do, and you occupy that chair really well.
Yeah, it's what comes with being very broad and quite short. It's the perfect chair for me.
Cool. You just need to bring the cat next time, the white cat.
I've actually asked John to provide me with a white cat. He told me it's something about getting stuffed, I think, at the beginning of the show. Or a stuffed cat, that was it, yeah.
Yeah. Word order matters, definitely. Okay. And I had fun doing today's show as usual, and we'll see you all again next week on Floss Weekly.